important. This is the ambassador of Uzbekistan, Mr. Asadov, and Mr. Titov, who is not leaving the stage, and he promised to take part as well. I'm going to moderate the session. I'm the Vice Rector for Strategic Development. My name is Artem Malgin, and we'll start with a video. Are we showing the video? All right, so we're not going to have the video. We're moving on. We're going to try to stick to the diplomatic etiquette in our democratic forum. And so we decided to start in the alphabetic order. I believe this is something we're all used to, and we are going to hear out the ambassadors representing their countries. The representative of the European Union will be the last to talk, and he will sum up our discussion. Then I would like Mr. Vinogradov to speak after the ambassadors. He was also preparing to ask some tricky questions. So now I give the floor to the Chargé d'Affaires and Interim of Austria and the Russian Federation, Mr. Gershner.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I would like to express my gratitude for the opportunity to contribute to this very important and interesting discussion. As to the question that we are posing ourselves, what is more important, politics or economy? I think in general terms, everybody would probably be able to agree on two things. First, politics, in order to be successful, requires as its main pillar or main foundation a realistic attitude towards the economy. Arguably something which communists in this country and other places lacked, leading to the well-known results. The second thing is that also the economy, in order to be sustainable, probably needs some degree of political regulation, something which the so-called neoliberalism arguably has tended to deny a little bit, particularly in the era following the demise of communism. More specifically, representing Austria, I would like to briefly reflect on two specific examples in which both my country and Russia have a stake, and which illustrate in an interesting way how politics and economy interact in practice. My first example is the Nord Stream 2 gas pipeline project, which, as we read today in the news, was technically completed as of today. Austria has always shared the view that the Nord Stream 2 pipeline is primarily an economic project. At the same time, we acknowledge that a project of this dimension cannot but have political significance as well. Not necessarily, though, in our view, in terms of European energy security, because that question would rather be whether Europe depends or depends too much on Russian gas. Whereas with the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, the question rather is whether that gas comes through that pipeline or some other pipeline. Certainly, however, a question is of leverage for Russia and Ukraine over each other associated to this project. On the other side, the project creates an additional link between Europe and Russia in the physical sense, but also in the metaphorical sense, something which most of us, I believe, would at least in principle not oppose. So the issue with that project, I believe, is to analyze carefully what the political implications actually are and to find a balanced and appropriate approach to address the concerns that are attached to this project. This seems to have been the path chosen by Germany and the United States when they recently struck an agreement on the issue. The other example I would like to briefly discuss is climate change mitigation. This is a political objective of global scale, and accordingly it comes with huge economic implications. And it is an area where the EU and Russia can benefit greatly from cooperation with each other. Acknowledging this, Austria has invited, in the beginning of July, President Putin's climate advisor, Mr. Edel Geriev, to a dedicated international conference in Vienna. The impression at this occasion was that there is a sincere interest on the side of Russia to engage on this issue. Let me also highlight and appreciate the great attention that the EU delegation with Ambassador Ederer at the helm at the local level pays to this issue. For the EU and its member states on the one hand side and Russia on the other side, I believe climate change mitigation could and should become an opportunity to join forces to help save the planet while benefiting their economies, as well as facilitating political rapprochement that is actually very much needed. With this, I would like to give it back to the moderator, and thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Minister. And now I'm giving the floor to Mr. Kristin, the Ambassador Plenipotentiary of Bulgaria in the Russian Federation. He is a graduate of our university, which is extremely precious. Is the microphone on? Good afternoon, Mr. Mulgan, Your Excellencies, distinguished professors, distinguished students. I'm very happy to be among such a young audience. I feel a bit younger when I'm among young people. The topic of today's debate is very interesting, since it is very provocative as well. I believe that is why it was chosen as the topic. Politics versus the economy. This is a question that's not really on the agenda in Bulgaria. Our vision, we are a member of the European Union, and our vision is that politics and the economy should go hand in hand. Politics should favor economic growth. And on the other hand, good economic growth sets conditions for politically mature societies, and it helps to strengthen political democracy and its values. These two subjects are deeply connected, and this is something that was proved 2 years ago when the COVID pandemic started. There were theories that the intervention of a state into the economy is not needed. These theories say that the market works by itself. However, when we faced the pandemic, it was too difficult for the market to function, and we realized that liberalization, when it comes to crisis, cannot solve some critical problems. And to a certain degree, politicians and politics intervened in the economy, and they used all of their potential. They did their best to mitigate the crisis. They did everything they could to save jobs, and they helped the economy to survive and to develop. even under these harsh conditions when we had to think about human lives. Bulgaria was looking for such a balance, and we took different wholesome measures to cope with the crisis. Now, or later, I can get back to the measures and tell you about them in more detail. And I can also sum up that the economy and business, individuals and firms, they all asked the government to take active part and to take active measures to mitigate this blow. And you all know about it because the economy suffered in every country. As the previous speakers, I would like to give two examples of the correlation between politics and the economy. And I believe that they have very important historic significance for Europe's development. The first example is the unification of Germany. Back in the 1990s, when the Germans said that we want to live in one country, and when politicians saw that they had to find a response to this requirement, you probably remember that there were certain economic measures introduced. They had to unite two currencies. They had to exchange the currency that they had for Deutschmark, and all the economists, including Bundesbank, they tried this correlation to be 1 to 3, if I'm not mistaken. However, Germany's chancellor said that we will exchange the currency 1 to 1. And this is a political matter. And he succeeded, and I believe that he was right back then, because all people expected the process to go faster, and they wanted this unification to be a faster process. And here is the second example. The second example has to do with the difficult times after the Second World War, when Europe was in a bad state, and Europeans had to think about how to live alive in a way that would help escape war. The Europeans tried to cope with the consequences, and they tried to unite politically and economically, and these ideas of unifications were widely speculated. And they tried to solve the problems together. They tried to avoid another war. According to Robert Schuman, it was not materially possible to leave the things the way they were. And you all study history, and you know that there were a lot of attempts. There were political attempts, there was the Hague Congress, and many politicians were looking for an approach. They were trying to find a political decision for the countries to unite with an aim of avoiding a new war. And there was one person whose name was Jean Monnet who found the right way. And he was not a politician or an economist or a diplomat. He was a French financial expert. And during his career, he has got unique expertise around the world. And he drafted an economic plan. And as we know, this plan led to the European community. He was successful in his attempt to unite Europe, and he believed that you can only succeed if you can achieve several goals, have a decision-making mechanisms, and then improve step by step. He communicated this to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of France, Mr. Schuman. He recommended that they need to get out of the deadlock of political consultations. And this way, this plan helped us achieve the development that we've had for the last 70 years. There has been no war, and the European Union countries gave away their political function to the common decision-making process. And this way, political theories, economic approaches, and the economy helped us find the right way that led us to the conclusion of Rome statutes. And this economic theory helped us establish the European Union as we know it today. I believe that this example illustrates how politics and the economy go hand in hand. And I believe that today we can also see some examples, and there are also certain situations when we need to find pragmatic steps, and these pragmatic steps can lead us to success. I'm sorry, I might be exceeding my time limit, so I'm ready to participate in our further discussion. Thank you very much for your attention. I give the floor back to the moderator. Thank you, Ambassador. And later, we will have some time for questions and answers and comments. So if you have any questions, you'll be able to ask them. And I would also like to remind that we have got microphones, and we also have headphones to listen to interpreting. Some of our colleagues will speak English and French, so you can raise your hand if you need interpretation devices. And the volunteers will bring the headphones to you if you need them. Now I give the floor to Antti Hilanteri, the ambassador of ambassador of Finland and Russia. And this is the ambassador that has always balanced economic and political interests and has always been successful in it. Thank you very much, dear colleagues and friends. It's very nice to be here. Thanks for having me. I represent Finland here.
Well, this is a small Northern European country that, if one comes to think of it and speaks about our economy, we are a country totally dependent on exports. Our economy is very important to us, and what matters is that we have access to international markets. And if we look at the history of our country, the history of independent Finland, then over 100 years, one would identify this desire to use political decisions to ensure free access to global markets. Not all people in Moscow may remember the 1980s. I'm referring to the trade and economic relations between Finland and the Soviet Union. Well, not everyone knows well that in parallel with those relations, we also had an ongoing desire to ensure access to Western European markets. There were important stages. I'm referring primarily to the 60s. In 1973, we concluded a free trade agreement with the European Economic Community, and this process concluded in 1995 when we acceded to the European Union. In the current context, when we see this turbulence in the trade policies, I think it is nice that at the global level we are represented by the European Commission. I cannot imagine a situation that we had to shoulder that responsibility of pursuing our interests at the global level as well as is being done now jointly by all the member states of the European Union. What is the global arena now? What is it like when it comes to global international politics? It's no secret that the WTO is going through quite a difficult period of its existence. At the same time, we see a weakening of the multilateral system of trade regulations, and we can see that if one tries to reach agreement on free trade, it is done primarily on a bilateral basis these days. Certainly this is better than nothing. The European Union has important bilateral relations, trade relations, and I think all people in the European Union are satisfied by the fact that we have a similar agreement with Ukraine. I believe that major countries, like let's look at the G20, these countries to a lesser extent depend on global trade than Finland. And it's good that the G20, in that body, we are represented by the European Union. The European Union is a fundamentally important body. We understand that this is a group of countries, an association of countries that represent our interests. We are lucky that over the past 15 years we have seen this trend toward a free trade. This is something that gave us an opportunity to develop and become the country we are now. Even before the pandemic, it was clear that protectionism was on the rise. This existed even before the pandemic, but the pandemic simply highlighted that trend. We were not happy about that, so we need political decisions to somehow reverse this trend. We all understand in the pandemic conditions, we have to protect our countries, we have to protect our markets. We all understand that, but we should make sure that we go back to these more open markets. And this is something that calls for very bold political decisions. From my point of view, and judging by our own experience, these decisions that we took in economic policy and trade policies, they were far from easy. They called for certain political boldness to make decisions like that, that would bear fruit only some years later, or a decade later maybe. But from my point of view, this is the only correct way. We need to balance economic and political interests in such a way that we ensure proper trade conditions in 10 or 15 years from now. Thank you. Thank you, Your Excellency. I think we have assumed the right tone in discussing the issue when we look at certain historical backgrounds that are oftentimes overlooked by modern politicians in the current highly emotional times, and we try to extrapolate those political examples onto our modern realities. And the other conclusion I wanted to make, something that we can conclude on the basis of this forum. People engaged in real economy and engaged in cooperation with the countries speak about the fatigue. People are tired of COVID restrictions. Now, from the ambassadorial part, we are moving on to our expert community, the expert view on the situation, on economy and Politics, Mr. Vinogradov, President of the St. Petersburg Politics Foundation. Good afternoon, dear colleagues. Many thanks for having me here at this forum, especially when we look at our distinguished panelists now. I am fully aware of the fact that a speaker of such a forum should strike the right balance, as Finland should be tough enough and radical enough in giving assessments to make sure that to hook the audience somehow, and at the same time, the speaker should speak about something that would intuitively be in line with the views of most people in the audience. I have noticed that political experts are not so often invited to political forums these days, and political scientists themselves, political consultants, are more and more reluctant to attend such forums. And the reason for that may lie in the fact that Russia's economy is no longer a criterion for politicians' effectiveness. These two spaces seem to live their own lives. This may not be true of Russia only. Let's look at the United States, for instance. The super successful economic presidency of Donald Trump didn't give him any political mileage. But from my point of view, that's the way the situation is in Russia. What are the reasons for that? The first one is there is no longer fear of an economic catastrophe. Before 2005 or 2008, people had a feeling that we can go back to the stress of 1992, 1998, and there are economists that safeguard and protect us from stormy situations like that. After 2008, the elites accumulated certain knowledge or generated certain stereotypes that keys to strategic stabilities are beyond the economic sphere, especially if we look at the period of economic turbulences. The rankings of the authorities were on the rise. The people were willing to support this state and be supported by this state. And even the pandemic itself, the situation, the pandemic itself has consolidated the situation. Despite all the controversial decisions and the deficit of public support, state support, and the empathy on the part of the powers that be, there is no economic catastrophe. People somehow find their ways and survive. Statistics, including economic statistics, is not represented on the agenda. It's not a secret that there is no economic growth, that we see the long-term decline in the living standards, as well as of statistics related to the mortality during the pandemic. But this has not produced much impression on the political actors or the people. The state is active in economy, but it is dictated by the need to spend much money, big money, focusing on developing infrastructure, which sometimes livens up the economy of the country, and in other situation results in nothing. And secondly, there is no need to take stock of the to take stock of the results of the current activities. No one knows for sure what the results are of the what we call national projects. Have they been fulfilled successfully? Mishustin's government does not insist on being successful and is not trying to stave off criticism, but is doing everything to make sure that the results were not discussed, were not high on the agenda, in the center of political battles. There are certain other limitations. The key sectors that are in the focus of attention, let's look at tourism or agriculture, for instance, they are almost insignificant when it comes to the national original budgets. There is a certain revitalization of economy, but it doesn't improve the situation drastically. And certainly the priorities of internal and external activities are different. We pay more attention to our foreign policy activities. It's easier to boast of your external activities since there are no particular goals set and any changes can be presented as your success. Unlike the economy, it's difficult to do so when it comes to domestic economy. It does not rule out the risks related to economic turbulences or the conflicts that are out there between Russian civil society and the security bodies. And this apathy when it comes to domestic economy, it's difficult to reverse that trend. It is possible only because of a serious economic or socioeconomic stress, or when it's some major emotion, so to speak. Sometimes the Russian establishment is fond of new projects. Let's look about the digital economy, for instance, or the digital state. It is clear to understand it is in line with the global trends, but no one knows for sure what is the goal for that. Are we seeking to improve the comforts of people, or are we trying to enhance the state's control over citizens? No one knows what the final end is. So the economy will continue to be on the periphery. Today, the situation is going to stay like that. No one knows whether it is good or bad. We can argue about it. On the one hand, this interest in reasonable economic goals and recipes, this is quite possible and quite beneficial. But on the other hand, no one is safe from becoming interested in certain unsound projects. Let's recall Chernomyrdin's times. There were lots of stresses, disruptions in the market, but the second part of his tenure was more successful, and there was even a joke that Viktor Chernomyrdin got the most expensive economic education in the world, alluding to the situation in Russia and the expense Russia had to go through. Well, today economy and politics live their own lives. Separate lives. Sometimes economic actors are reminded who is the boss in this country, use certain pressure, but on the whole, economy and politics live their own lives. Once again, economic goals are on the periphery. But still ensures that Russia doesn't demonstrate interest in exotic projects that may fail. So anti-Marxist statement. Now I would like to give the floor to Johan van der Platze, Chairman of the Association of European Business, President for Russia and CS at Schneider Electric. I think this is the person who has to prove to politicians that business does exist, that business matters, that it has its own interest, that there is a European business that continues to work in these complex times and who cares about what politicians think about the economy. Well, certainly we care.
Okay, the topic, the impact of politics on business realities, obviously is huge, is big, and it has been a driver to the good, but we also have challenges because of it. In many cases, indeed, politics have contributed a lot to positive economical development, and the Polish ambassador gave the example of the unification of Germany, the wise decision on the conversion of the Deutschmark, the Eastmark, sorry, not an easy one. There are other examples, many examples in the history. The mother of all examples being the New Deal of Franklin Roosevelt, where indeed after the Depression starting in 1929, between 33-39, a lot of packages, stimuli, investments in infrastructure, new regulations were introduced, helping a lot. More recently, the meltdown in 2008, the financial crisis. Initially, Europe not reacting quick enough, but that changed by, remember, the political words, actually, by Mario Draghi, who said, within our mandate, the ECB is ready to do whatever it takes to preserve the euro, and believe me, it will be enough. Before that, especially the weaker euro countries were under pressure. Their currency was under pressure. The bond yields went up. Those words alone were sufficient to calm down the investment climate. Very recent, another example, the way that we stepped up following the COVID crisis. March 2019, panic everywhere. Already a couple of months later, the EU announced a massive relaunch investment package over 750 billion euro initially, and added billions more in the so-called digital and green transition pact. So there are a lot of positive implications of impact of politics on business, for sure. But unfortunately, there are also the other ones. And I want to talk a little bit more about the other ones, because indeed it's mainly related then to geopolitics. And what we see is that geopolitics are actually killing what I call killing the global supply chain. The days where a technology was developed, say, in Silicon Valley, and from there sold across the world, or the days where technology was developed and manufactured in Shenzhen and sold from there across the world, those days are gone. We are seeing a breakdown of the global supply chain in at least two big blocks. The Western technologies for the Western world, Eastern technology for the rest of the world. Big question, where is Russia, Central Asia going to land? And the reason of the big breakdown, I think, are manifold, but I would like to point out two big ones. Starting indeed relevant to this part of the world, sanctions against Russia, the counter-reaction from Russia's side. Now, the Made in Russia concept and the fact that the government is stimulating local production is a thing that we welcome. Made in Russia is not new. It happened already before 2014 as a way to try to diversify the economy away from exportation of hydrocarbons. But it really took a new momentum after 2014, basically driven by the concern around security. From the Russian side, the fear that supplies of technologies for mainly critical infrastructure could be cut off anytime, hence push for those technologies to be produced and localized in Russia. Those companies, European companies that had a local production or that stepped up its local production, actually those fared not bad, but it is a challenge. But the bigger change is not that one. The bigger change and explanation of the breakdown of the global supply chain is China. It's call it the Huawei case, which is a symbolic case around that. But that really has had a impact that I think is still not well understood enough. So, you know, the Huawei case, Huawei is blocked to sell its technologies to the US, to many European countries. The reasons why are complex. And it's also true that there are very legitimate concerns around Chinese business practices, including around protections of IPRs. But in our view, those disputes, they ought to be solved through organizations like the WTO, not by saying we forbid Huawei to deliver to our markets. That does not work. By the way, Chinese people, we know them, soft-spoken, friendly people. They are furious, and they will not forget, and they think long-term. And already shorter term, one of the reactions, I used to work for a company called Alcatel. China was the biggest market worldwide of Alcatel. Today, it's now Nokia, Ericsson, they sell almost nothing anymore in China, just like Huawei is selling nothing to the UK or to Europe. Another example, Western companies are not allowed to deliver microchips to the same companies. What is the reaction? China is today investing billions of dollars in developing their own microprocessing industry. And tomorrow, talk about shooting in your foot, companies like Intel and Qualcomm, I'm sure, they will be confronted with competition that today does not exist from China. Tomorrow it will. So the second revolution, I think, has been really the big game changer that people still not fully appreciate. And the fact that it's not appreciated, I think, is also muddling the views and the debate again around Russia. Why is that? Back to Russia. In Russia, we see more.
Recording in progress.
Pardon me?
Don't care.
I'm cut off. I'm cut off. We see more and more restrictions around foreign business in Russia, partly fitting this Made in Russia policy. But very recently, on August the 28th, the Russian government tightened restrictions on state procurement of imported radio electronics. They changed the rule, third one out to second one out. Basically, it means that a customer must reject bids within an offer of imported radio electronics if there are at least 2 bids of offers of similar Russian or EUA-made products. Quality is not a consideration. And this is, by the way, also applying to the importation of medical equipment, which could have a very, very bad impact, of course, on Russian people which are seeking the best medical treatment by the best medical equipment. We see more and more restrictions around foreign software as well, especially for critical infrastructure. What is critical infrastructure? Hard to tell. So at the EIB, we are on the one hand concerned about that because we fear that we see a distortion of the level playing field between foreign and Russian companies. And we are believing that an open economy is the best way to foster economical growth. I mean, we all know that. But at the same time, ironically, while we are concerned, some Western politicians, you also have to realize, are less concerned about what is happening. And some of them, they would actually even welcome it, saying, okay, let's Russia close down its economy. Sooner or later, it will collapse, just like the economy in the USSR collapsed, because it was a closed economy. And there, this comparison, in our view, is wrong. It's wrong for 2 reasons. The first one, because today you're having, in the meantime, first-class Russian companies like Yandex, Meltosh, Karoo, Sber, super innovative, in many ways often even innovative in certain applications than Western players. But the second thing that really changed it, and why a comparison between USSR and today is not longer relevant, is back to my Chinese case. Because in the late 90s, globally, the Chinese market was super small. Today, the Chinese market is the largest one in the world. So while corporate headquarters of multinational companies, before the Chinese case, they did not really pay so much attention to what I'm saying. Okay, let Russia also close down, because for us, a big, large corporation, it is a small market compared to our US market, compared to our European markets. Today, headquarters of large multinationals, they do realize that they need to do something to save as well their Chinese business, and that the challenges that they face in China are pretty similar to the challenges that they are having in Russia. And what I'm seeing already today is that multinational companies, they are delinking, my starting point, the supply chain. They are indeed producing in the West for the Western world. They're stepping up their supply chain in China for the Chinese market, but also they start to source from China to other parts which are, call it, sensitive. And in my view, if this trend would go hand in hand with what I would call a 3-step approach from the Russian side, then we are really in uncharted waters. What I mean with the 3-step approach is what I described. First preference, Russia for Russia. Second preference, China for Russia. I say China for Russia. I don't say Chinese companies for Russia. I say China for Russia, implying supply chain moves of European companies to their Chinese production. And only on the third place, Europe, US for Russia. If this would become ingrained, I think we really are seeing a big change. And why would Russia do that? Because, by the way, European companies, when they localize their production in China, they're minimizing European or US content to be sanction-free. And China will never impose any restrictions on the supplies of technologies towards Russia. It's different. I mean, they don't follow that kind of a policy. So in my view, it is not enough to simply point to the limitations of a made in Russia policy and count on an eventual collapse of this new closed Russian economical session to say it will pass away. I mean, the shifts are already happening today. And I was reading not so long ago a statement from the global CEO of Ericsson. He was talking about the sixth G standard, not the fifth, the next one. And he said, you know, my biggest fear is that China is going to develop a 6G standard, which is going to be completely different from the 6G standard developed by us in the Western world. You could compare it a bit with, remember, those around the turn of the century, you had two standards. You had CDMA made in the United States, you had GSM. Ultimately, the GSM was the global standard used all across the world. And for a couple of years, companies like Ericsson, Nokia, they flourished because of it. If there would be a split in 6G standards, all the supporting technologies as well around that would fall into that digital divide between the two supply chains that I'm mentioning. So politics can impact business in a good way. Ill-conceived politics can provoke tectonic shifts in the business realities as well. And we hope that the pandemic, opened our eyes for global collaborations, because indeed we can only really work together if we're getting out of that logic. And we're very much welcoming, for instance, the collaboration that we start to see around climate change and green technologies, because that's the other global challenge that we have. So as the AAB, we always pleaded against the use of sanctions and threat of sanctions as a policy tool, because they are not effective. They are provoking those shifts that I'm mentioning. And we are believing that the normalization of relations and a return to true diplomacy with strengthening of international institutions like the WTO, if there are economical trade disputes, I mean, that this is the right way forward, because it's, again, I repeat myself, it's only through an open economy that we will all be better off, and it's only through a true open economy that also, at the end of the day, the Russian economy and the Russian consumer is going to be better off. Thank you.
Большое спасибо. Это был прекрасный example.
Thank you very much. That was a great example of how business understands politics. It understands it very deeply. It can analyze it. And it would be great if politicians could analyze the economy and business this way. Now I give the floor to Pascal Larrault. It is the person who is both a political scientist and a person who works with business. Pascal started his career in the French Institute of International Relations. This is a think tank that was there in the 80s. He was an analyst of Eurasia and the Soviet Union. And then he has spent many years in the Bank of Reconstruction and Development in Europe. He was the president of this bank. And now Pascal heads the Institute of Choiseul. This is an institute that ranked French economists and businessmen and people from non-economic sectors who influence the economy. And then this rating was spread to other countries, and now this initiative is in Russia. Thank you very much. Dear colleagues, dear friends, I'm very happy to be here. Thank you very much, Mr. Titov, for having me here. I don't know Russian very well, so I'm going to switch to French. If you need interpretation, make sure you get your devices.
Dear Artem, for your introduction.
Voilà. Merci beaucoup. Donc,
thank you so much for me. It's a great pleasure to assist here. Just like to describe in details the previous introduction, perhaps I make a general overview of the happening things. The economics and politics can go in the same way, in the logics of a positive way, as we see different positions, and there is one true thing. Wait just a minute, please, dear Pascal. Thank you so much.
Одна минута на то, чтобы вас донести на уши. D'accord, on peut continuer.
Ladies and gentlemen, a lot of things were already told here, speaking about the complementary character between politics and economics. Today on the international area, we see that economics and politics go in the same way, but sometimes in the opposite way. In addition, this question is really true. I'm speaking about the economic effect of this ongoing process. It's a tool, like a range of different economic tools available in different countries. Today, we're living in the open situation where societies becomes closer more and more. And I would say sometimes the political authorities have the supervision, and it results in sanctions despite the number of geographical regions. And we see at the same time there is a lot of political exchanges. At the same time, there are no enough sufficient tools to support these political exchanges. Speaking about this actual political situation, today we speak a lot about the supporting tools for the international law. And right, when we see that some countries do, I would say, illegal or illegitimate actions on behalf of the states in the autonomous way, despite their own rules. I'm speaking about the countries which make impact on the fluidity of investments, and at the same time the economy is really supervised by this political pressure. We saw in 2015 a very good example when French bank BNP had problems due to American supervision resulting from the Federal Reserve rules. And finally, it was connected between the relations, including the Iran and Cuba Republic, despite international laws. But it was some kind of a disconnection given the American legislation. It means that we see the actual political situation which has a great impact and impedes good economic exchanges worldwide, despite the fact that we see attempts to improve the situation. And we understand very well that on the European level, we try to find out good tools, legal rules based on this case of 2015 in order to put in place a specific tool to reimburse, to compensate the European companies in order to ensure the continuous activities despite the steps done by American authorities in order to find out real consensus and agreement in order to ensure the commercial exchanges and continuous investments following these logics of better fluidity. At the same time, in addition, When we see this kind of logics and attitude and politics, what are other means or tools that can be used in order to improve these economic financial exchanges between the states? Or speaking about these logics of a normal situation, how could we make the things faster, as Artem Mergin asked me to answer before? I would like to just mention two additional elements that can improve in a normal situation, only crisis situation, to improve, to reinforce the political economic exchange between different actors, and also to enable different companies to continue their cooperation without any international problems due to the legal limitations or restrictions. First of all, speaking about not only about the countries, but regions or great big cities, we see that the borders are more and more open, and at the same time, the state actors, when they act inside their internal politics, at the same time, regional actors, they try to share real economic diplomatical steps on the European level, speaking about the case of Italy, Germany. At the same time, we see another approach based on conflicts when these countries try to promote their independent policies, trying to find their own partners, and this approach becomes more and more important in international relations today. When we see great French regions try to develop their own politics and policies, and speaking about the European perspectives, speaking about the Barcelona steps of 1955, and continue on this approach on the European Union level to develop bilateral relations between the regional actors or great cities of the Mediterranean region in order to include great state structures and those private companies in order to see finally the appearance of new actors in order to ensure this kind of a marriage between politics and economics in different sectors like energy, transport, environment, energy, and sustainable development also. I would say, for me, it's a new additional component that should be included in the political and economic approach, despite the actual political situation and despite existing tools. The second additional element for your ideas, for your reflection, I would like to address the public experts and people, speaking about the great companies on the authorities of tomorrow, after tomorrow, not only from Russia, but also from other countries. I would like to mention that the possibility to create connections and links between civil authorities and private companies, it's a very important thing, like between France and Russia, thanks to the Trianon de Dialogue, thanks also to the direct participation of Mr. Tarkunov, rector of MGIMO University. But when we're speaking about this dialogue between civil societies and companies, it can create bridges, and also including young generation, when they can meet each other from different countries to exchange their ideas in order to ensure positive result finally, where these young people can exchange different historical basis, different experiences, And finally, it provides and promotes better economic links that sometimes it doesn't happen in the normal way of classical cooperation. Speaking about also the activities of our Choiseul Institute and also the activities provided in France, starting from in 1956, also speaking about the initiative started towards Russia, where more than 50 big high-level political and financial experts from Russia, from different Russian regions and governments, where they tried to meet to see each other in the independent way in order to establish direct links with their French direct counterparts. And also at the same time, it is same kind of a big challenge that we're facing. Speaking about not only about the conquest on the market, but it's very important not to forgive and forget also the personal relations. Speaking about not only about French-Russian relations. And after 3 years of bilateral cooperation of this type, we see new contracts and also in industrial and technological cooperation in new spheres, in new sectors. Without any state public participation in this cooperation. At the same time, public authorities, public experts, people from Russia or France, sometimes they say it's not worth doing that. Speaking about this political, economic cooperation without state inclusion. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Pascal. And I can say that our next meeting with Institute Choiseul between Russian economists and French will take place on the 12th of October. And the previous meeting in Paris was hosted by Mikhail Makarov, who is the trade representative of the Russian Federation to the French Republic. As a matter of fact, as I have already said, we have 2 heads of trade missions. And I have the same question to both of you. Let's start with the French corner, so to speak. How can trade representations can function in this context? Can they do anything real to promote the country's economies given those restrictions? And what can be done, actually? Thank you very much indeed, Artyom Malgin. Dear colleagues, allow me first to thank the organizers for me to come here from Paris. This is a rare occasion. We asked for permission, and you were allowed. Given the audience that we have here at this forum, not everyone understands what we're talking about. I will say a few words. This is the official economic mission of the Russian Federation to France that has a diplomatic status, and its main function is to comprehensively support Russian exporters primarily and attracting investments to the Russian Federation. And as a matter of fact, we're talking about mutual investments here. And I would like to take this opportunity, given the fact that 90% of our audience are MGIMO students. I would like to say that we're pleased to invite students as interns, and they can start working at our mission. This may sound strange, but we are ready to consider candidacies with a good command of language, but without any experience. If you are qualified enough and you have the qualifications of MGIMO University, do not feel shy to come to us. As for the trade representations, everyone spoke about them, starting from the Federation Council to other bodies. What is the most important thing here? Above all, we should speak about the goals we are pursuing. One can look at France. Let me say a few words about Russia and France's relations. We have profound cultural roots and deep relations, but we also have traditional sectors, industries, classical energy sphere, atomic energy, air and space industry, Sukhoi Superjet and other flagship projects, MS-21, involve French producers, including engines, automobile industry, agriculture. These are the sectors where we cooperate. On the other hand, we have an important task to support non-commodity, non-energy related sectors. If we look at the structure of Russia and France in exports, we will see that there is an asymmetry of sorts. As we know, 85% of exports will account for oil and gas. If we look at Articles 2 and 3, items 2 and 3, we will find primary processing of metals and timber. The next question arises whether we should support the promotion being a trade representation. As we know, no, we shouldn't do that. This is something Deripaska said yesterday. 70 million of tons deficit that China has, double the prices, and this is something that we shouldn't interfere in. As far as France is concerned, and Russia's import from France, we can say that we speak about machinery, equipment, chemicals, and many other spheres are represented in the imports from France. 3+ processing is the idea promoted at this forum. If we look at the investments of France to Russia, how many French companies do you think are active in the Russian Federation? Give me any figure, any assessment off the batter of your head. More than 600 French companies are now working in the Russian Federation, and France is the biggest investor in Russia, bigger than Germany even, and we can continue speaking about the investment climate here in Russia, but not a single French company over the past years has left the Russian market. Moreover, I meet many French people who know, and if they know Russian, for instance, they have certain links to Russia, they would prefer to live in Moscow rather than Paris. This is something I can say with confidence. I'm fully confident about that, and we should understand those trends. If we look at the number of companies, Russian companies working in France, I think there will be no more than a handful, just not more than 10 companies or something like that. This should be discussed separately, but this attests to how France is attractive to Russian companies. I shouldn't be saying that probably, but oftentimes I have to talk Russian companies out of going to French markets. This is not Eastern Europe or Germany. France involves a lot of logistical problems. You need to go through 4 borders, for instance. This is a closed, non-growing market characterized by red tape. Red tape in France is quite comparable with Russia's bureaucracy. This is an absolutely, totally competitive market. So when a potential exporter approaches me saying that they want to export goods to Auchan, for instance, I am trying to understand whether or not this is a mature export, and there are very few companies ready for that. It means that they should be able to fulfill the contracts and observe all the regulations and things like that. This is highly important it is highly important to understand that we have a lot of well-educated people. If we look at the historical background, apart from German mathematicians, we will find many Russian and French people there. So we have a very good educational potential, and in this regard, it's important from my point of view to find that niche. When Mr. Malgin asked me what is the purpose of trade representations. What's the added value of their operations? We need to find niches, and we should be speaking about technological cooperation here when it comes to cooperation between France and Russia. Energy efficiency should come first. Sustainable Development Forum was held quite recently, and anything green technology, low carbon issues, transition to low carbon fuels, waste disposal, smart cities. The second niche that I see in terms of technological cooperation is the digitalization of industry. I'd like to thank the Trianon Dialogue platform. Back in February, we had an artificial intelligence forum. Big data, cybersecurity were on the agenda, cloud technology, predictive analytics, and the third niche that exists from my point of view in the technological cooperation is automated industries, robots, robotic technologies, the Internet of Things, and many others. I can continue about this hours on end, but in terms of how trade missions, trade representations can be useful, they should identify such niches. You know the principle 80-20. 20% of effort should boost the result by 80%. We cannot continue promoting experts. We should, energy experts, we should do something else, looking for the necessary niches, looking at the audience. And in conclusion of my intervention, it's important from my point of view to be able to find those niches. Maybe this may sound a bit provocative. You should be less of a diplomat. You should be more commercially oriented when looking for such niches. And a question from a representative of Finland. Let's check this investment data. I think Finnish investments amount to 18 billion euros. Ms. Kariakin, a representative of the Polish Investment and Foreign Investment in France. Good afternoon, everyone. I would like to thank the organizers for having me here. I would like to associate myself with what the previous speaker said as a Polish trade representation, a representative of the Polish business here in Russia. We see our main goal to show Russia that can be interesting for Polish investments and for Polish experts. At the same time, if Russian entrepreneurs are interested in accessing European markets through Poland, we can be this focal point. Why am I saying that? Given the fact that today's forum's topic is policy and economy, it's important to note that such organizations as ours, when politics, we are a state body, creates the economic business structure that enables businesses to work. Politics is politics, but business should be supported. Does politics influence economy? Yes, it does. We certainly see that at the very beginning when certain sanctions are imposed, when the pandemic closed all the borders, we clearly see where that this happens. Where should we look for the balance? We shouldn't be looking for that. We should be observing what businessmen do, what entrepreneurs do. Our first contact with entrepreneurs shows that they are looking for ways out, and they succeed in doing that. And we shouldn't be creating obstacles them. Instead, we should support them. Despite all the political issues that are out there, the interest between businesses of both countries does exist, and this is something to take into account. It's important to know that. And even if one feels that at a high level, countries do not always agree, businesses want to work with one another. How can politics help that? What can be done? What are the obstacles? The first thing to note is quite obvious, but still, in the epoch of the internet, there is lack of information, surprisingly. For instance, Polish entrepreneurs, a potential investor from Poland who wants to invest in Poland, still doesn't know much doesn't have many good sources that can tell them what should be done and how things should be done in Russia. This is this lack of information that impedes. And I would agree with the previous speaker who says that there is a need for a dialogue between civil societies. Indeed, this is quite important for people at all levels to foster this interaction. I believe there is a stereotype about Russia that some believe that this is a complex market and that where you will be eaten up and you shouldn't even try to access it. Others believe that the things are just the other way around. Nothing exists here. You can simply start selling your product without conducting a simple business analysis. And there is this disbalance of sorts. So we need more information. This is the bottom line. From the state, for instance, what and how things should be done here. The second moment that should be noted, which I think will promote interaction between the countries in economic and trade terms, is this international agreement. Surprisingly, they matter, even such minor things as there is an international agreement on mutual help in the legal sphere between Poland and Russia, and under this treaty there is no need to do apostille. This seems to be a minor thing, but when a Polish investor comes with his papers without an apostille, or the other way around, a Russian investor comes to Poland without the apostille, the authorities say that they need to get one, and this results in certain obstacles and difficulties because not always, the authorities have an idea of what treaties exist and how important they are. And when such factors accumulate, build up, people end up in problems and red tape, which certainly does not contribute to the development of business. The third moment to be mentioned, and this is quite obvious, stable legal framework is important. Laws change everywhere, which is true, at least in many countries that I can think of. But what matters is not the changes in law, but the continuity and a uniform interpretation of what exists. For instance, almost customs authority has its own interpretation of law, and it's important to ensure that there is an effort to ensure a universal interpretation of how things should be interpreted. Things should be interpreted similarly in Moscow and in Poland. And another important thing is the openness of borders. True, we all know what difficult times we are going through, but if we look at the lists of every state who is allowed to cross borders, these lists are getting bigger and bigger, but still not everywhere there is an opportunity for businesses to enter a country. Poland has opened up its borders through the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. If you make an application to the Foreign Ministry, then businesses can enter the country, can enter Poland, which is important because if physically we are unable to come, we understand that things can be done online through Teams, but personal presence matters a lot. It's hugely important. Taking stock of what I had said, everyone knows that there is a stereotype that the concentrated interests take the upper hand. And that is why it's important to be very concentrated for businesses in the good sense of the phrase. Business should be visible for politicians. Politicians should see those obstacles that exist and should understand that something should be done to address those issues. Thank you for such specific proposals. And now we're coming back to our distinguished ambassadors. Mr. Federer, that ambassador of the European Union to the Russian Federation. You have the floor.
Tito for having me. When I asked to be the last speaker, I expected exactly that situation, namely that time is up. And I was a bit disappointed that the chairman did not ask me to be short. But
Мы начали на 15 минут. We started 15 minutes later, so we can keep it.
And I asked to be the last speaker because, first of all, I did not expect a controversial discussion, and it was not one. Everybody agrees that that functioning politics and functioning markets go hand in hand, but I would put to you that we are increasingly faced with a situation where dysfunctional politics struggle with dysfunctional markets. And politics, for various political reasons, domestic and foreign, intervene in markets where it's not good, as Johan would have put it. But markets are also increasingly dysfunctional, faced with external shocks. Financial crisis was mentioned. It entailed a huge regulatory push after the Thatcher and the Reagan years, quantitative easing, and now we had the pandemic again, where our economies were at stake altogether, and where the state again had to intervene, and because the markets were not fixing it. I will leave this aside because I think we have talked about this enough, and I would just maybe want to concentrate on one thing. I had planned to talk a little bit about the problems European businesses face because of too much state intervention in Russia. Our businesses being I think the most important partner to Russia still. The EU is still Russia's biggest trading partner, and you will have heard this figure: 75% of foreign direct investment in Russia is from European businesses, 75%. So I can only appeal to the Russian authorities to treat European businesses well, because they are creating growth, they are creating jobs, and they are in for innovation and compliance. But Johan has already mentioned a few examples, such as state procurement, including increasingly excluding our businesses. As I see Boris Titov, we face structural issues, such a very low participation of small and medium-sized enterprises in this economy, 20%, as opposed to 99.8% or 6% in Europe. 99.6% of all enterprises in the EU are SMEs. And it's not good for the future of our trade relations. I can say so much, and it's also not good for the future of our investment relations. Also, the state security strategy, the latest one, puts security and stability clearly over growth. And if you ask a company why are they investing, they're investing in areas where countries grow. They're investing in areas where people have money in their pockets, and I refer to now 7 years of shrinking real incomes of Russian households. And this needs to be treated very seriously and very carefully, because you may not have seen much, but there may be a tipping point. The point I want to make is maybe extrapolating on what Johan said, with whom I agreed a lot, is the major political impact on our markets in a time where a political economy has emerged from the financial crisis, was strengthened even during the pandemic, is the increasing competition between the US and China. It will force companies, in particular in Russia and in the EU, to make choices. Choices we have not been facing in a global economy. We may have to develop two products, one for a US bubble and one for a China bubble. Why? Because in particular in the field where Johan works, which is digital, Schneider Electric, both sides don't trust each other's technologies, because they believe maybe the other side, the state, built in some back doors. I mean, this is also behind a lot of what we see in terms of localization here, but you mentioned the Huawei case, but it's not going one way. I mean, some of you may have read that China prohibited state employees and party members to drive a Tesla car. Why? Because they believe that all the data end up in the United States. So this is how we are now limiting the globalization as we knew it. And it will be difficult for enterprises, and I think Johan has already put this very well, but it will be difficult for all of you, for all of us, namely the consumers, because we will pay more. If a company needs to develop two solutions, I mean, he's nodding, we will all pay more. There was a question on how do we contain these political risks. WTO has been mentioned, and I really recommend to look at this situation because it is disenabled by the United States basically putting the appellate body out of function, so there is no more appeals. The rules and the rules-based order which the WTO represents are there on paper, but nobody can enforce them anymore. And a solution which the EU has led, namely an interim appellate body, which would work until the original appellate body is in place anymore, has not been accepted by countries such as Russia and China. So any appeal will be an appeal into the void at these days. And we will basically not have a level playing field as we knew it. So this is the general trend. There will be more politics and less markets if, in particular, the US and China do not find a way of not forcing everybody to choose between us or them. And we see this development already. They are looking at us and they say, you know, if you're not with us, you're with them. Also economically, technologically, not only politically. And this is what I wanted to share with you. Thank you.
Спасибо, господин посол.
Thank you, Ambassador. You actually were not the last ambassador to speak. Mr. Asadov, the ambassador of the Republic of Uzbekistan, we have him in the front row.
Узбекистан — это та страна, которая
Uzbekistan is the country that has been demonstrating the most dynamic and vibrant relations with Russia in the last several years. And I believe Mr. Asadov will also speak as an economist, because before coming here, he was Deputy Minister of Economy. Thank you very much, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear participants of the session. Just as my colleague from Bulgaria mentioned that I've been among a lot of young people today, and that's very nice. I've heard many interesting comments today, and I would like to join the words of my colleague from Bulgaria. Ambassador said that politics should create conditions for developing economic cooperation. And you can look at the example of the relations between Russia and Uzbekistan. We have a mutually respectful dialogue at the highest level, and it creates the precondition for economic cooperation and humanitarian cooperation. Mr. Mulgin knows very well that in the last 3 to 4 years, Uzbekistan has opened 8 or even 9 branches of Russian universities. Before 2016, we only had branches of 3 Russian universities, or 4. Now we have branches of 13 Russian universities, including the first foreign branch of MGIMO in Tashkent. When we're talking about economic cooperation, I believe that we have a very active dialogue at the highest level, and we don't have any major challenges on the agenda. And all of this sets conditions for economic cooperation. And in the last 3 to 5 years, our economic cooperation has been developing very quickly. Even during the pandemic, the growth of our trade flow was 60%. And this year as well, the export and import is growing, and the trade turnover has been growing. And the share of goods with high added value is growing. In spite of the unfavorable conditions in the resource market, the trade turnover has still grown. And when we analyze this growth, we believe that it was due to the goods with a high added value. the investment cooperation has also been growing, and today we have more than 2,000 enterprises with the participation of the Russian capital. And Russia has around 600 enterprises with the participation of residents of Uzbekistan. There is an active exchange when it comes to industrial cooperation and production cooperation, and we're also working together in science and technology. So getting back to what I wanted to say, I believe that having a dialogue where the parties trust each other gives us an opportunity to develop economic cooperation. And I believe that politics and economics should complement one another instead of facing one another. Thank you, Ambassador. Mr. Titov, in one of the drafts of our program, you were mentioned as the moderator or the co-moderator of the session, so you probably have some questions to ask. First of all, I would like to thank you. You are a better moderator because I'm a businessman, and to moderate a session, you need to have diplomatic skills and training, and every word here is highly important. I believe that today's session was not very diplomatic because everyone was very honest, and they gave us a deep analysis of what's going on. As for me, to sum it up, I would like to say something that's not political and not diplomatic, and it might be a little naive of me. Dear ambassadors, could we take out economic aspects like economic sanctions and economic pressure out of the political agenda? Why do states try to solve their political problems through economic tools? Economic tools do not exert pressure on the leader of the country. When we're talking about the economic agenda, it is pressuring the population of the country. If you really want economic damage, then the economic pressure is most of all something that will influence business negatively, because it's the business that's the major play here. So business always evaluates the risks of their investment and the income that they will get. And when it comes to our relations with Europe, it is obvious that there is a great potential of developing our relations with Europe, and we believe that Europe is the biggest market for Russia. And these are the markets that work very well together. And when it comes to the economy, we can talk about a common economic space. We are really thinking of getting rid of tariffs for European business. It would be very good for the Russian economy. And we had the former Prime Minister of Sweden here and many other foreign experts. For example, the Swedish company IKEA, they mentioned that there are technological problems because our countries have different technological standards. But if we had one united standard, then we would have a bigger turnover. So is it worth all the risks? Should we really deal with political risks like that? Talking about China, China has started selling its oil reserves in order to lower the world energy prices. This is a political decision, and this is a decision that will influence the world economy. Why do we need these risks? They are so much higher than if we just took out the economic component out of politics. Now we need to finish our sessions with answering the questions that Mr. Titov answered. I'll give 30 seconds to every speaker, either to answer the questions or maybe give a comment, share some thoughts that you've had. So 30 seconds to everyone who wants to talk. Is there anyone who's willing to give their comment? Pascal, are you ready?
I think it's very important, as Mr. Titov said before, we should go out of the usual traditional politics. It's our final goal, which will reinforce relations between nations. But it also, this is an exercise that can be rather difficult, taking into account the current international situation. As Mr. Titov said, if we want to know where our economy is situated towards the politics, given also the economical situation, we should use soft and hard power. Speaking about the final goal, we should take first close step before going further. If we would like to protect our national interests. Thank you so much.
Mr. Ederer, Ambassador?
Thank you. To come back to Boris' questions, if we were in a political clean room, a clean room in chip production is something where there's no particles in the air, everybody has a white coat and a mask. If we were in a political clean room, it would of course make sense to disentangle politics and the economy. But let's not be naive. There is no political and economic clean room. It starts with anti-monopoly policy. Everybody believes they need an anti-monopoly policy because the market would defeat itself if the state did not intervene. There is no clear separation. And when it comes to sanctions, yes, they are hurtful, but no, they cannot be avoided sometimes, as the Russian counter-sanctions, which, by the way, cost each and every Russian consumer 3,000 rubles a year. I think it is a study by RANEPA. I haven't seen what the European sanctions cost the economy, because that's the only way states these days will deal with each other. Sometimes it's called sanctions, sometimes you don't call it sanctions, but it has the same effect. The economy at the same time wants the state to intervene to rescue the economy, as we have seen during the pandemic. And then it also sometimes has to bear with the state maybe making unfavorable decisions for the economy. The state makes unfavorable decisions to the economy all the time. Fiscal policy, monetary policy, and entrepreneurs will complain. But the sanctions in place of the European Union, they have a clear objective, namely the full implementation of the Minsk agreements concerning Donbass. And as long as that is not resolved, we will see the sanctions. And they are not crippling. They are not crippling. So I think we should live with some state intervention here, as long as it's not destroying the economy.
Спасибо. И две коротких ремарки, господин посол
And two
Хелентера.
brief remarks by Ederer and Mr. Gershner. Thank you. The Finnish companies that are working in the Russian market, there are 500 of them, and mostly in St. Petersburg and in the northwest. But I'm also inviting the representatives of the Finnish business, those who work in Moscow. I invite them to the embassy regularly. And last time we met yesterday, we've met several times this year. And I don't remember a single company discussing sanctions. They just live in a different world. They have different concerns. And they can see how the market is developing in quite an optimistic prism. And as for your proposals to lower trade barriers, we obviously support such ideas. Thank you very much. And the last speaker, Mr. Van
First of all, I would like to congratulate and thank the organizers and my co-panelists for this very stimulating discussion. Austria as we heard, is similar to Finland, is a heavily export-oriented economy with, I believe, 6 out of 10 euros created by the Austrian economy as a whole, actually created by export. What does it mean for our relations with Russia? Russia is the biggest market in Europe with 140 million people. At the same time, it's only ranking 15th in the, according to size and the number of Austrian foreign trading partners. So there is really a huge potential here to develop, and to facilitate the realization of this potential, I think requires political action on the bilateral level, but also on the EU-Russia level. That would be my message at the end of this discussion. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And Johan.
Yeah,
On sanctions is, I think, very clear. The impact of politics on business is very clear. The impact of politicians on the legal system is very clear. I just wanted to end on a note on behalf of the AAB. Boris Jurovic, thanking you for being so vocal on another topic where politicians and the legal system can influence, which is it's not sorted out, decriminalize commercial procedures. We just went over the first ruling of the Baring-Vostok case. We all tremendously regret that criminal procedures are being used on a claim which is basically a commercial claim. Yeah? There's going to be an appeal. We really hope, because we're all in the same boat, there are hundreds or even thousands of also Russian entrepreneurs facing the same problem. I think it's important to talk about the big politics, but there is small steps which also can be done, which could make a difference indeed for the investment climate. Again, on behalf of the AIB, I want to thank you for having been so vocal in that respect.
Thank you. И я благодарю всех участников.
I'd like to thank all the panelists, my colleagues and friends, distinguished guests, and the audience, and I would like to give the floor to business.
Thank you.
Я хочу на это, на Жанну Фриске.